Hello, you guys. So welcome to Lecture 2 of Intro to iOS Development. Today we're going to be going over the topics of UIKit and also AutoLayout. So to start off with introductions, my name is Lucy, and I am currently a senior CS student in the College of Engineering. I joined AppDev when I was a sophomore in the spring. So I've been on AppDev for about a year and a half to 2 years now. So in my time on AppDev, I've been an iOS developer on Polo, Ithaca Transit, and also Pair. This semester, I'm also the pod lead of Pair, which is a new app that we're trying to launch this semester. And obviously, I'm also a course instructor for the class this semester alongside with Matthew. And so I'm really excited to be teaching this course. A little bit sad that, we're online this semester, but nonetheless, I'm still very excited, and hopefully, throughout the semester, I'll get to meet more of you through, office hours and piazza interactions. Yeah, so just to start off with some logistics, please make sure that you're enrolled in this course on Student Center. The last day to enroll is October 2nd, so if you miss the deadline, you're not going to be able to take this course for credit, and you should be enrolled for 2 credits. And also make sure that you're added to our course CMS. So CMS is a platform that you're going to be submitting all of your projects on. It's also where we're going to be distributing grades on. So you definitely need to have access to CMS. If you don't have access, we have a Piazza post up currently. And so you can just go and find that and then add your net ID to it. And we'll give you access as soon as possible. And also enroll in our course Piazza. So that's where you're going to be in direct communication with the TAs and with the course instructors. If you ever have any questions on projects or if you need any help, that's a great place to go. And also, I just want to point out our course website. So our course website has all of the resources for this class, basically. So all of our lecture slides, all of our lecture codes and starter codes, and also project write-ups. We also have a very detailed textbook that covers all of the material that we'll be going over this semester. So it is definitely a great resource for you to go check out. A note on grading policies. So your project 1 was due last night at 11:59. We will be taking late submissions up until Wednesday with a 1-point deduction for every single day the project is late. And that's kind of the policy that we're going to be sticking with for the rest of the semester. That being said, if you ever have any extenuating circumstances, don't hesitate to let us know on Piazza. Just make a private Piazza post telling us, what happened and why you need an extension, and we kind of reevaluate based on that to see if we want to give you an extension. I'm trying to do that within maybe 24 hours though, so we have a good amount of notice time. If you ever do badly on a project, that's okay because we will drop 1 project grade. So the only exception is that we won't drop your first or final project, so those 2 are final. Yeah, and then we also have a grading and projects fact section of our website if you want to read more about how grading works and how this course works. And we also have a course calendar that details all of our grading timelines and deadlines. So that's a great place to go to kind of get an overarching view of everything that we'll be doing this semester. And you'll also see when projects are due and when grades are released, etc. Also a note on office hours. So we do offer office hours in this course, and you can find all of that in our course calendar, which is linked. And we also have a tutorial up on our website of how you can actually request office hours appointments through our calendar. So please take a look at that. And just please be respectful of the TA's time when booking appointments. So that just means, please try to book appointments maybe 24 hours to 12 hours in advance, because then this just gives TAs more time to kind of plan for the appointment and add it to their own calendars. And also please be mindful of, other students using this calendar. We have had some issues with students accidentally deleting certain events when they're trying to book appointments, and that just kind of makes it hard for the TAs to have to re-add their events to the calendar, and it makes it hard for other students to see what office hours are offered. So please just check out the tutorial and try to follow that for when you make appointments. And this is just a screenshot of what the calendar looks like. Yeah, so let's start off with a review of lecture 1. So this is a question that hopefully I'll give you some time to think about. So if in this question course is a struct, what will get printed to the console? So the answer to this question is course A will be, course A's name will print out to be CS 1998 Intro to iOS, and course B's name will print out to be CS 2110 Java. So hopefully you guys got that right. The reason for this is, struct is a value type. And so what this means is that, variable values are copied over. So when you say like course B is equal to course B is copying the value of course A. But then when you change the name of course B, you're only changing course B's name. So course A's name stays the same as it was before. And that's why course A's name is still just Intro to iOS, whereas course B is Java. So a follow-up to this question is, well, what if we change course to a class? The answer to this is they will both print out CS 2110 Java. And the reason for that is, once again, class is a reference type. So that means that when you say course B is equal to course B is actually copying, or it's copying the reference to course A's object. And so now like course A and course B actually point to the same object. So when you change course B's name, that will also change course A's name. And that's why they're both going to print out to be of the same value. And this question is very heavily based off of the project that you guys just submitted, specifically part 2.5. So what happens if you run this code? And the answer to that is you'll get a compile error. So this is actually something that a lot of students struggled with when they were doing the project. So I just kind of want to point out and explain why this is the case. Yeah, so why are we getting a compile error? And what is this like, CS courses is immutable, let constant, like what does that mean? So basically, the reason why this error is coming up is because you're saying in your third line, if let CS courses is equal to CS courses or equal to courses CS, then CS courses dot append a certain value, right? And so what's happening here is because of the let constant, CS courses is actually immutable. And so you cannot add anything to it, So I know some students are trying to alter their dictionary by this approach, and this is a wrong approach. The right one is you want to say like courses bracket CS question mark dot append CS 1110, and so that just makes it so that like if CS or if courses CS is an optional, so or like if it's nil, then you just don't add anything. But if it's not nil, then it will add the CS 1110 to the actual array itself. Hopefully that makes sense. And lastly, what happens if you run this code? Yeah, so this is kind of a trick question as well, because this is also going to give you a compile error. And the reason why is A is an int optional and it's equal to nil, whereas B is an int. And so they're of two different types, so you cannot just assign one to the other. So hopefully that also makes sense. So yeah, now let's move on to the topic of today's lecture, which is UIKit and AutoLayout. So UIKit, what is UIKit? So, the definition of UIKit is just, UIKit is a framework that is created by Apple that basically provides you with all of the important infrastructure that you need for your iOS apps. And so that's kind of vague, right? So what does that really mean? So first of all, I just kind of want to explain what a framework is. So a framework is really just kind of like a collection of programs that do something useful for you. So it kind of abstracts out all of the lower level implementation details so that you only have to worry about the high level implementation. And so in the context of UIKit and iOS development, basically UIKit provided by Apple handles like all of the miscellaneous details about your app that you don't want to care about. So this includes like setting up the window of your app, setting up your view architecture, or also like managing app interactions like within your entire app system, right? Because like these are things that you don't want to have to handle, So for example, like, when you're like, on your phone on an app and you want to like text something in a text field, right? Like when you click on the text field, the keyboard pops up, right? And so that's like a very like natural thing, but you as a developer don't want to be writing that code to do that. So UIKit just kind of like handles that for you. And UIKit also handles stuff like navigation, like screen popping, screen pushing, all of that. But more relevantly to you, UIKit provides basically all the core objects that you need to build iOS apps. So, what are these core objects? So these core objects can basically be broken down into two main things. So one, the view controller, and also two, views. And so what is a view controller? So a view controller is basically just a screen in your application. And so that's like the overarching screen, and it maintains and also manages kind of like the view hierarchy with all the subviews inside that view. And every single app has at least one view controller that kind of fills up the entire window, and we usually call that the root view controller. On the other hand, a view is just an object on a screen. Like a view can have like other subviews, but unlike a view controller, it doesn't really manage anything besides their own view. And that's it. So you kind of think like a view controller is really smart. It handles interactions, like handles a lot of things, whereas views are kind of dumber. They're just like kind of like static. They're just their own like one single entity. And views can actually be broken down into a number of subclasses, and those include like UI image view, UI button, UI label, UI text field, etc. And so to kind of explain what I just said earlier is here you have an iPhone screen, right? So the entire screen is basically our view controller. And that view controller holds all of these different views, right? And it holds like at the top, you see the UI label, which is just the text. It holds the UI image view, which is like the image, the button, the UI text view. Yeah. So how do you actually work with these like core objects, right? And so basically every single view and object class come with properties that you can set in order to manipulate the appearance of the object. And this is kind of like the beauty again of UIKit. It just kind of like does a lot of the work for you, so you don't have to worry about like implementing this, you just have to use it. And so for example, let's say you have like a label that's like a name label, right? And it's a UI label. You can set the text color, the text alignment, the font directly within just using their properties. And we'll go more into that in our demo. Yeah, so then moving on to auto layout. So now that you kind of know of like the different kinds of views that you can work with, how do you actually get these views onto a screen, and how do you like have them kind of like work with each other, and how do you have them look good on all different kinds of iPhone screens? So the answer to that is just auto layout, right? So what is auto layout? AutoLayout is basically a constraint-based layout system that allows us to position and size views relative to the screen or to other views. And so basically this allows us to create an adaptive interface that responds appropriately to changes in screen sizes. So, you can, because there's so many different iPhones, right? You have like your small iPhone 4, you have your like really big iPhone X Plus, you have like iPhone 8, so many different iPhones, but you want your app to look consistent across all of these different screens, right? So AutoLayout basically lets us do that. And, we do that by, setting kind of like constraints on the anchors of each view. So every view has anchors that you can set, and you can position one view relative to like another view, or you can position it relative to like the entire app overall. And again, it just lets us create adaptive interfaces across different screen sizes. I talked about anchors, right? But more specifically, anchors they fall into basically 8 main anchors that you can set. So every view has these anchors. They have like a top anchor, they have a bottom anchor, they have a left and right, leading and trailing anchor, and they also have like a size, width, and height anchor, and then they also have their center point anchors. So there's center X, center Y. And so visually what this looks like is just, say you have like a button, right, and that's a view. It's pretty intuitive, you know, height anchor is just the height of this view, width anchor is the width, you have your leading, which is like the left, the trailing, which is the right, and then you have like your center X, center Y, top and bottom anchors. So pretty self-explanatory. So I just wanted to kind of jump in here and add something that I forgot to mention. So in addition to these anchors, there are actually 2 more anchors that I forgot to talk about. So those are left and right anchors. And you know, you might be confused as to like what the differences are between like, you know, left and right anchors and like leading and trailing anchors. And for the most part, we try to avoid using left and right anchors, and instead we only use leading and trailing anchors. And the reason for that is just that like left and right anchors always refer to like the left and the right of like a screen or like a view, right? But the problem is that like, you know, in different countries where say like the text actually reads from like right to left, then like your view will be a little bit messed up if you're always using left and right, when really you mean like they're leading to their trailing. So I guess what I mean is like if say like in a certain country, like text goes from like right to left, then your right will be considered the leading and your left will be considered the trailing. And that's actually like the view that you want. You don't want the reverse of that, which is why generally we just avoid left and right anchors. We only set leading and trailing anchors. So this is kind of an example with another app. So this kind of pertains to the view controller overall. View controllers also have anchors. So the height would just be the entire like height of the screen. We have the width anchor, again, leading, trailing, top, and bottom. And so then breaking down this app into the views that we talked about, you can see that, you know, like the title of the song is a UI label, the album cover is an image view, and the pause and play button is like a UI button. Yeah. And so, you know, we talked about anchors, right? So what are constraints? So constraints are basically rules that you kind of set that tells like one view where it should go relative to another view. So I guess like an example of this is like, I can look at this screen and say like, oh, I want the top of my song title to be, say, like 20 pixels down from the bottom of my album cover image, right? So in this case, like you're saying that I want to constrain my UI label to the bottom of the image. Yeah. A special case that you want to be considerate of is when you're setting like your top and bottom anchors, you don't want to be constraining the anchor relative to the root view's top or bottom anchor. Instead, what you should be doing is you should be constraining the view to actually like, it's called safe area layout guide dot top/bottom anchor. And so basically the reason for this is that like, you know, there are so many different iPhone sizes nowadays. So you have like your iPhone X, you have your iPhone 8s, you know, 4s. And so with like the newer iPhones, you know, like there's like a bezel at the top, right? And so then like, you know, with those phones, the top anchor would refer to the very, very top of those phones, but that's actually not the top that you want to be working with, because like you don't want to, so yeah, so here you see like, you don't want to be constraining to the very top. You want to be constraining to the top of the actual like app itself, like the real estate that you can use. And that's just called the safe area layout guide dot top anchor and bottom anchor. Yeah. Another important note is that, you know, when you're setting constraints on views, you must set the translates auto resizing mask into constraints property to false. And that's something you need to do every single time. That's just kind of a Boolean value that determines whether or not your like auto layout constraints will even be activated. So if you don't set it, you'll see that like, views won't look the way you're expecting. And this is a very common mistake that you'll make. So just make sure you don't do that. Okay, yeah, so, I talked a lot, but maybe like some of what I said still seems pretty abstract. So let's kind of go through an example of what I mean when I say like anchors and constraints. So in this example, like, how would we create a constraint to set the top edge of view 2 to be 20 pixels down from view 1's bottom edge? How would we do that, right? And so the answer to that question is just, first, you start off by saying view2.top anchor, right? So now you're referring to the top anchor of view 2. And then you say dot constraint equal to something and constant as something. And so equal to just refers to the view that you want to be constraining relative to, and constant is kind of like the offset that you want to kind of set as the constraint offset. And so in this case, you want to be constraining relative to view 1's bottom anchor. So you just say view 1 bottom anchor, and the constant in this case is just 20 because you want to be 20 down from that. So, pretty self-explanatory, I think. So then let's just go to our second example. So in this example, how would we create a constraint to set the top edge of view 1 to be 20 pixels down from the top of our screen? So here you see, we have top of the screen, and then we also have safe area layout guide.top anchor. And so following the same logic as what we did before, the answer to this question would just be, you want to say view 1.top anchor. So again, referring to top anchor, and you want to constrain that to the view.safe area layout guide top anchor. And then you want to say constant is 20 because you want to be 20 pixels down from that. Yeah, so these two examples hopefully give you a better sense of, like how AutoLayout works. Next, we're going to be moving on into kind of a live demo. So you'll see even more concretely how we can set up an app, how we can add views onto a screen, and how we can set layout constraints on those views. Okay, yeah, so now we're going to move into the demo portion of today's lecture. So hopefully this will give you a better understanding of how to actually use UIKit and AutoLayout in your first iOS app of the semester. And so this is kind of a GIF of the final product we'll be making today in today's demo. So, it just has some of the basic UI views. So the UI label, UI image view, UI button, and also UI text view. So I'm going to show you how to kind of like add these views onto the screen, as well as how to constrain everything using AutoLayout. So the first thing that you want to do in setting up this application is we want to open up Xcode. So you can just open up your Spotlight search using command space and look for the Xcode IDE, and it should just come up. I actually already have mine open, but when you open yours, what you should end up seeing is something kind of like, you should end up seeing a screen like this. And so we're just gonna go ahead and click on this first option, app. If you have an older version of Xcode, this might be called something else. I think it's gonna be called like single view application, so click on that. So you can click next, and then for product name, you can name it anything that you want, but I'm just gonna name mine like lecture 2 demo. And I'll keep none for team. For organization identifier, I usually just keep it as com.myname, but it could be whatever you want. And since we're not actually going to be uploading this to the App Store or anything, like the name doesn't really matter. And then we're just going to keep kind of the default options, so Storyboard for interface, UIKit, App Delegate, Swift, and we're going to leave these 3 boxes unchecked. And then when you click on next, it will ask you for a location to save this project. And you can save it wherever you want. Usually I save mine in the desktop because that's just the easiest place for me to find the project afterwards. Yeah, and then you just want to click create, and then it will, Xcode will build this project for you and give you all of the necessary files that you need to start building your app. So hopefully, after you have created your application, you will end up seeing a screen kind of like this. And this is just kind of like the bare bones of what Xcode provides you. And so I kind of want to go through and explain to you what each of these files are. So here on the left-hand side, you basically see kind of like a folder directory. So this kind of shows you like all the files that you have. So as you can see, this is my kind of like my project directory, and then here we have our project folder and all of these files that were made. First, we have here the appdelegate.swift file. So the appdelegate.swift file is basically just the main entry of your application. So this is the place where much of your like logic and app states are handled. And so like when your app launches, this is the file that is run. And this second file, scene delegate, some of you might not have it depending on what version of Xcode you have. But scene delegate was kind of added because of the release of iOS 13. And that's when basically the responsibility of handling app launch got split between the app delegate and the scene delegate. And that's just to accommodate the fact that like on say like an iPad, you could have multiple scenes of your application open. And so that's kind of why, but you don't necessarily have to understand entirely what I'm talking about. But basically, you know, scene delegate will handle like all of your launch, like all of your launch details that pertain to the view itself. Yeah, and you have here the view controller class or the view controller file, and this is basically the main like screen of your application. And then next here we have main.storyboard. And we're not going to be using main.storyboard because we're going to be using AutoLayout as the way that we're going to lay out the views on our screen. But storyboarding is another popular way that developers lay out views on iOS applications. And basically, my storyboard seems to be having a hard time loading. But basically, like a storyboard is like you can see like so here you see like they kind of give you this like application screen template, and you can kind of like drag and drop different views onto the screen, and that's like one way that developers can kind of build views and build screens on iOS. The reason why we don't use storyboarding is because generally in industry, storyboarding is avoided just because storyboarding makes versioning really difficult to manage, and especially if you have like a lot of people working on the same code, like it just gets really messy, right? Because like sometimes like you know different views get a little bit messed up, and so like we'll have different versions of the code, and it's just all around kind of confusing. So we tend to avoid using storyboarding. The next thing here is assets. So assets is where all of your like images will go and or all of your assets. So for example, here you have like your app icons. This is where you would like kind of add the images for your icon and it gets displayed. Later we're going to be for our app, we're going to be adding a picture of Bill Gates here. So you'll see how to use this. And then this next file is the launch screen.storyboard, and this is just kind of similar to our main storyboard, and this is just a way for us to kind of indicate like what screen we want to show when the app is first launching, and usually it's just a static screen. So as you can see, it looks just like how the main.storyboard looked. And then lastly here we have the info.plist file, and the info.plist file is basically just kind of like a key value file that contains all of the configuration information of your app package. You generally don't need to understand this very well. Usually you kind of like just edit it as necessary. So yeah. So now that we kind of understand like what these files are, what we're gonna do first is we're gonna delete our main.storyboard because, as I mentioned, we're not going to be using it as part of this application. So you can just here say delete. So you right click and then you click on delete, and then you say move to trash. So then now the main.storyboard should be deleted, or I guess it will be deleted in my case. Okay, yeah, and then the next thing that you want to do is you want to go into your info.plist, and here where you see main story. Yeah, so then the next thing that we want to do is we want to come up to here where you see application scene manifest. And so you want to just keep on expanding that until the very end. So you keep expanding all the carrots. And here, the last thing here is you see storyboard name. We also want to go ahead and delete this. So this will just kind of like get rid of all of our storyboard stuff that we don't really care about and that we won't be using. So this next part that we're going to do might be different depending on what version of Xcode you have. So if you have seen Delegate, what we're going to do is we're going to set up the launch of our application. So what we want to do is inside of this function, so func scene, we want to first get rid of this line, and you want to say if let window scene equals to scene as UI window scene, then let our window equal to UI window window scene, and then you let our view controller be equals to our view controller class. Oopsies. So view controller class. And then you want to set the root view controller of your window to be equals to this view controller. And then you just want to like set your window to be this window that you just created. And then you just want to make your window visible. So you do that by saying window.make key and visible. Yeah, and so this is basically just setting up like one scene of your application. And that's more so just in the context of like iPads, if you can perhaps have multiple scenes. But in this case, since we're working with like just the iPhone, you're only gonna have one. So this just sets up your main window. So this is if you do have seen Delegate. If you do not have seen Delegate, then what you want to do is go into your app delegate.swift file. And what you want to do is inside of this function, application, this application function, you want to write, so let window equals to UI window frame UI screen dot main dot bounds, and then you want to again instantiate your window view control, or instantiate your window as, or instantiate your view controller. So you say let view controller equals to view controller, and then you want to set the root view controller to be this view controller that you just created. And then you just make it visible. So you say window dot make key and visible. Yeah. So this is what you would do. And so since I have seen Delegate, I'm actually just going to comment this out. And we'll click on run just to see what happens. Yeah, so here you see my app is here, or my simulator is here, and it is building my project. And then we should be able to see like what this app looks like on the iPhone. Okay, yeah, so the app is finished building, and as you can see on the screen, there's nothing, it's just black, and that kind of makes sense, right? Because like we haven't actually like laid out anything yet. So let's kind of just go ahead and start doing that. So the first thing that we want to do is, so here you have your view controller class, and as I mentioned before in our lecture, the view controller basically sets up the main window and like the main screen of the application. And there is this function override func view did load, and this is a function that is run when like your view kind of like comes into so like when the view becomes visible. So this is where you actually want to do all of your additional setup after loading your view. So the first thing that we're going to do is let's just make the view.background color white, because right now it's black and it doesn't show anything, right? So let's just do that first. And I'm also going to kind of separate this main function into a number of helper functions. So I'm going to create another helper function here, and the syntax for that is just func setup views. And also here, I'm going to make another helper function called setup constraints. And the idea is that inside of this function, anything that pertains to creating a view would kind of go here, and anything that pertains to like setting our like constraints on our anchors will happen inside of here. So after writing this, what we expect to see is when you click on like run again, we'll see a blank white screen, right? But just to remind you, the app that we're trying to build is this app, this like Bill Gates app, right? So maybe the first thing that we want to show is actually this Bill Gates label, right? So how do we get this to show up onto our screen? So to do that, it's pretty simple. The first thing that we want to do is here, right under class view controller, we want to kind of declare all of the labels that we are, or all of the views that we're going to be using. So what you can do is just say var name label and declare that of a type UI label. And so what this is saying is kind of making this name label now like accessible by the entire class, and we're saying that like this name label is of the type UI label, and we're putting this exclamation mark because we're saying that like we're going to guarantee that name label will exist within this class, because again we're going to be defining it and we know that we're going to be doing it, so we can be reasonably sure that this that we are allowed to be using the exclamation mark. Yeah, so here we just declare the name label. And so now what we want to do is, instead of setup views, let's try and set up this first UI label. So to do that, what we need to do is say name label equals to UI label parentheses. So this is just a syntax for instantiating the name label. So now we're creating it to be of a UI label class. And after that, as I mentioned before in the lecture, we have a number of properties that we can set on this name label in order to kind of get it to show what we want to show. So the ones that we care about is, one, the text, like what do we actually want to show in this label. So in our case, we want name label dot text equals to Bill Gates. Another thing that I might want to care about is like, well, what is the color of this label, right? So for that, we want to say name label dot text color is equals to UI color dot black. And the reason why we do UI color.black is black is kind of a color within the UI color class, and that is the type that this property is expecting. So that's why we write it like this. Yeah, so then we can say like, you know, like as you can see in our keynote or in our kind of demo app, we want this bill gates to be aligned in the center, right? So what we can say then is name label dot text alignment is equal to I think it's you can say dot center, and that would just set it to be in the center. And I believe this is of it is of NS text alignment type. So this is kind of a shorthand, but we can also do is say NS text alignment dot center. And actually, the same goes for this too. Like we can explicitly write out UI color dot black. What we can also do is just say name label dot text color equals to black. And same for this. We can just say text alignment is equal to center. Yeah, and then the next thing that I want to do is set the font of this label, right? So the font that we want in this case is name label dot font, and we say we want the font to be, we'll just take the system font, so whatever is provided to us by Apple, and let's just say that we want the size to be 20, and we want the weight of it to be bold, because it seems like whatever we had earlier was bolded. Yeah, and now the last thing that we want to do, again, as I mentioned in the lecture, is we want to assign layout constraints to this label, right? So in order to do that, we have to make sure that we set the translates auto resizing mask into constraints property, and we want to set that to be false. So we say name label dot translates auto resizing mask into constraints, and we say that is equal to false. And so this kind of like this basically provides us with all of the styling that we want. The last thing that we want to do is then basically add this view onto our view controller. And to do that, we just say view.add subview name label. And that's it. That's all you really need to do to kind of set up this view. So let's just here make sure that we actually call this helper function. So I'm going to copy this and paste that here. And I'll also do the same for setup constraints. So yeah, we have added this label. So what happens if we now run our app? Okay, so now we see that our screen is white, but we don't see the Bill Gates label, right? So why is that, right? Well, it's because we created this label and we set all the properties, and we also said that like, oh, we set this property to be false, meaning now UIKit will know that we're going to be using AutoLayout for this, but we didn't actually set any of the constraints for this name label, right? Because now like the view controller doesn't actually know where to put this view, right? So actually what we want to do is set the constraints of our name label. And if you take a look at our example or our final product, we can see that, you know, this label, the center of it is in basically the center of the entire screen, right? And this top anchor just seems like it's constrained to the top of the phone, right? So we can just kind of, it's like constrained to the top of the phone by some sort of offset. right? So we want to kind of simulate that in our Xcode file. So maybe what we can do is just add the constraints, add the center X and also add the top constraint. So to do that, what we want to do is say ns layout constraint dot activate. So this will activate your constraints. And this is a syntax for it. So basically you're activating like an array of constraints for a certain view. So in this case, we care about the name label. So what we want to do is click, so we say name label dot top anchor, right? And we want to constraint that to be equal to the top of the view. So as I mentioned before, we don't want to say view.top anchor. We want to say view.safe area layout guide dot top anchor. And we want the offset to be, let's just say arbitrarily 10 or something. So it'll be, the label will be 10 down from the top of the screen. And the next thing that we might want to set is the center anchor of this name label. So what we can do is say name label dot center x anchor dot constraint, and we can say equal to the view dot center x anchor. All right, so once we have this, let's try to run our app again and see what it does. Yeah, so now we see Bill Gates showed up at the top, right? And it looks the way that we expected, you know, like the font looks correct, the weight looks correct, it's black, it's in the center, and also it's like constrained at the top, and it's like centered at the center of our view. So, so far so good. So the next thing that we might want to then lay out is here the picture of Bill Gates, right? And so this is a UI image view component. So let's just try to set that up. So right underneath our name label view setup here, we're going to set up our image view. So we're going to follow something similar to what we did before. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to kind of declare this a variable for the UI image view. So let's just say like bar image view and declare it to be of type UI image view. And we're going to do exclamation mark again because we can guarantee that we're going to instantiate this object within this class. And so here we'll kind of do the same thing. We'll say image view, and we're going to instantiate that with the image view class. So we're going to say UI image view parentheses parentheses. So this will create that image view. And now we want to set the properties on this image. So what is the thing that we want, right? Like what is the most important part of this image? Well, clearly the image itself. So we do that by saying image view dot image is equal to UI image named. And so basically what this does is this will basically create a UI image object based on whatever like parameter you pass into it, and it will set that as the image of this image view. So what should actually go into here, right? So before I mentioned that like we have an assets folder here, and I said that this is where all of the images that you want to use in your app should go, right? So this is also where we want to end up putting our Bill Gates image. So let's just kind of go onto Google and download a picture of Bill Gates. All right, so click on image. You know, I think, I guess, you know, let's just take this photo. All right, maybe let's just actually let's take this photo. It doesn't really matter, but I'll just take this photo. And what I'll do is I will save this image. And I guess I'll just save it to downloads. And then from there, what I can do is open my Finder and go into my downloads. And this is the image I just downloaded, right? So I'm going to rename this to just like Bill Gates or something. And then I'm just going to drag that into here. And as you can see now, like there's a name associated with your image, right? So this is a name that you want to use inside of your view controller. So let's just say Bill Gates. So now this will take that image and add that to our image view. And once again, we want to set the translates auto resizing mask and constraints property. So we'll say image view dot translates auto resizing mask and say that is false. And then we also want to add that image view onto our view. So we do add view or view dot add subview image view. And then now we want to set the constraints on this image view, right? So how might we want to constrain this image? Well, it looks like here, you know, what are some of the properties that, or what are some of the constraints that we might want to add? Well, you know, it seems like there's a size to the image, right? So there's like a height and there's a width. So we probably want to set that. And it seems like this image is again like centered in the center of the screen as well. So maybe like we should also add the center X anchor. And also it seems like, you know, this is kind of like some number of pixels down from our Bill Gates label. So it seems like we probably should also set a top anchor. So let's just go ahead and do that. So the first thing that we're going to do is do something similar to what we did before, and we're going to say NSLayout constraint dot activate. And let's just give our image view a top anchor. So let's say image view dot top anchor dot constraint equal to name label dot bottom anchor. And let's just say the constant is like 15. Okay, so now what else might want to set? Well, the center X, right? So let's just say image view dot center X anchor dot constraint and set that equal to our view dot center X anchor. So now we have the image will be will be 15 pixels down from our name label. It'll be in the center. So let's just also then set the size, right? Like what is the size of this image view? So let's just set that to be image view dot height anchor dot constraint. And let's just arbitrarily give this, say like 200, and we'll make the height and width both 200. And actually, if you want to set it to be a constant number, the syntax for that is you actually want to say equal to constant. And you kind of want to do the same thing for the width anchor. So you say image view dot width anchor dot constraint equal to constant, and say that's also 200. Okay, so great. Now let's try to run this app and see what we get. Okay, great. So, you know, everything looks pretty good. So now we have this Bill Gates image where we kind of expect it. So that's great. I also want to kind of go in and note a few things. Usually for image views, some other properties that you might want to set are kind of like the image content mode. So in this case, let's just use, so image view dot content mode is equal to, and you see like here, Xcode has a pretty like robust autocomplete feature, so they give you like really good options. Like it kind of just automatically knows like what you're trying to do, and it gives you like all the possibilities of like the value that you might choose. So here are all of the different like content modes that you can choose to use. The one that we're going to use here is just scale, aspect, fill. And so it just keeps the aspect ratio of your image, and it'll fill up the size of the like height and width that you set earlier. But there are other ones, you can also play around with those if you want to. And another property that is usually useful to set for image views is the clip to bounds. And we're going to set that to be true. And clip to bounds just means like if there's any like excess in the image outside of the size that we declared, it will just cut that off. It'll clip everything off. And this is particularly useful for, say, like later if you want to apply some sort of like circle, like you want to kind of like make your image a circle or something, in which case you want to cut out everything that's like outside the circle. So that's just kind of good to know. Okay, so the next thing that we would want to do maybe is add this follow button, right? And this will be very, very similar to how we just added the Bill Gates image. You know, it seems like this is, you know, has some sort of height, some sort of width. It's constraint centered to the center of the view, and it's also some number of pixels down from our image. So let's just go ahead and add that to our view as well. So once again, we'll come up to the top and we'll say var follow button. And let's just declare this to be of type UI button, because that is the type of button. And once again, we're going to use exclamation mark. And then inside of our setup views, this is where we're actually going to instantiate this follow button. So we're going to say follow button equals to UI button, and we're going to initialize that. And then we're going to want to do a number of things. You know, here it seems like this button has a text, right? It has some sort of title. So let's just set that. So the syntax for that is you'll say follow button dot set title, and then autocomplete kind of just like takes over if you do enter there. So the title that we want here is just follow. And for the state, again, there's like a number of states that you can choose from. The one that we want is just normal, so just the regular button will just have the subtitle. Yeah, and the next thing I want to do is maybe set like the title color, right? And you see like the title color here is blue. Yeah, so let's just say follow button dot set title color, and let's just call that like system, or let's just say blue. And then it'll ask you for a state, so we want just the normal state. So it'll just be a blue title set that says follow. Okay, yeah, so now we want to, again, do what we did before, is set the translates auto resizing property. So let's say follow button dot translates auto resizing, and set that to be false. And let's just add this onto our screen. So we'll say view dot add subview follow button. And now we want to add the constraints for this button. So we'll come down here to our setup constraints function, and we're going to add the constraints for the anchors of the follow button. So we'll just say NS layout constraint dot activate And it'll be very similar. So we want to set a top anchor constraint. So we'll say follow button dot top anchor dot constraint equal to in this case image view dot bottom anchor and some constant. So let's just in our case maybe say like 15 again. So let's just say this is 15. And then we'll also set the center X because it seems like it was in the center of our screen. So let's just say follow button dot center X anchor dot constraint equal to view dot center X anchor. Great. And now we might want to set the height and width of this button. So let's just say follow button dot say like width anchor dot constraint, and let's just say make that like 100 or something. And we also want to set a height. So let's just say like follow button dot height anchor constraint, and let's make this like 50 or something. And so this will just give our button some like width and height, and also it will constrain it to yeah, so I think that should work. So let's just run it to see what it does. Oh, so it's complaining because my syntax was wrong. So here we set the width anchor equal to, and you want to say equal to constant. And same for here, I just missed the, I want to say equal to constant. Okay, great. So now we have like, we have our label, we have our image, and we also have this button. And as you can see, it kind of looks different than the keynote, right? So most notably, it's kind of missing this border, right? So how do we add that in? So there are actually properties for that. So the properties for that are, what you want to do is come to here, and it's called like the layer, and it's called like the border width, and so and so And so to do that, what I want to do is come here to our follow button again, and basically we want to add a border width to our follow button. So to do that, we'll just say follow button dot layer dot border width, and the width of that, let's just say it'll be 1, and we also want to assign a color to that, right? So we'll just say follow button dot layer dot border color. And let's just say we want it to be blue, and we set the CG color. Also a note on why we're doing this. As you can see, this looks slightly different than how we've been declaring colors before. For example, like if you look at, say, like here, right? Like before, for setting a name label dot text color, we just do UI color dot black, right? But here we're doing UI color dot blue dot CG color. The reason for that is just that, this border color is a property of the layer of this follow button, and generally layers always take a color of the CG color type. So basically this takes the blue color within the UI color type, and it makes it into a CG color type. So that's just kind of the way that Xcode handles like different types for different properties of views. Yeah, so this will basically add the border that we want. So if we run this again, we should be able to see the border. Okay, great. So now we see that, we have this label, we have this image, and we also have this button. So the last thing that we have to add onto our screen is just this really long text, right? And so this component is called a UI text view. And UI text views are kind of like UI labels, but generally UI labels are much shorter, whereas like UI text views can be used to display much larger text. Again, the initialization and declaration process is very similar. So up at the top, we want to kind of instantiate or initialize this variable. And so let's just call it text view. So let's just say var text view and give it a type of the UI text view. And we add the exclamation mark. And then here we'll do the same thing where we say text view is equal to UI text view. And again, this just kind of like creates a text view of this UI text view class. So now you want to set the properties on this text view. So once again, like obviously the most important text to display, or the most important thing to display in this text view is the text. So this is similar to the UI labels. You'll say text view dot text, and you want to set the text that you want to show. So let's just kind of look up, I guess, the biography of Bill Gates. So biography. So let's just take this, let's just take this and add that here. So now we'll be displaying this text inside the text view. And so now, what you what you want to do is the same that you did before with setting the translate auto resizing mask constraints property, so you can apply auto layout to this view. So we'll say text view dot translates auto resizing mask into mask into constraint so that be false. And then we also want to add this text view onto our view. So we'll say view dot add subview text view. And this will just add this view onto our screen. So now let's set the constraints for that. And once again, this is pretty straightforward. The only thing being that it seems like, if you look at this text view, clearly there is like a top anchor, right? It seems like this view should be some number of pixels down from this follow button. Another thing that we notice is like, it seems like we still have some sort of center X anchor. Like we still want this to be centered according to the screen itself. So we want it to be aligned with the screen. Another thing we notice though is that like, it seems like there's kind of a leading anchor and also a trailing anchor as well, right? Because we want to know where we want this text view to start and where we also want it to end. So see, there are also leading and trailing anchors. And this view also has, a bottom anchor, like where do we want this to end, right? Because, unlike an image and a button, there's no fixed size for this. It's really largely dependent on the text, inside. So let's just go ahead and add those constraints. So let's just do ns layout constraint dot activate. Let's say text view dot top anchor, and we want to constraint that equal to the follow button dot bottom anchor, and we want that to be, say, like 15. So it'll be 15 down from the follow button. And we also want to set the center X. So let's just say text view dot center X anchor dot equal to, or dot constraint equal to the view dot center X. Right, and so now we also want to set the leading anchor, like where do we want this text to actually start. So we want this text view leading anchor dot constraint, and we want this to be equal to basically the leading anchor of the view itself, right? But with some padding added to that. So we can say equal to view dot leading anchor, but with a padding of say just like 15 or something. And then we also want to set like where does this end, right? So in this case, let's just do the same thing. So do trailing anchor dot constraint equal to so it's constraint equal to view dot trailing anchor with the constant. Now, one thing to note is that like when you're setting the constraint of a bottom anchor or like of a trailing anchor, your constant is actually negative, right? Because you want your padding to be like say like 15 pixels to the left of the trailing anchor of the view. So it would be negative, whereas like before in the leading, it's 15 pixels to the right of the leading anchor, and that's why it's positive. So for trailing anchors and bottom anchors, usually the constant will be a negative value. So the trailing anchor would be negative 15. And then let's just do the same thing for the bottom anchor. So let's say like text view dot bottom anchor dot constraint equal to, and so we don't want to say view dot bottom anchor. We want to say view dot safe area layout guide dot bottom anchor, and let's just say constant negative 15. So it'll be 15 up from the bottom of the screen itself. Yeah, so let's just run this and see what we get. Okay, great. So here we see we have added the text view and it looks great. Yeah, so it looks great. But one thing here is we see that like, you know, it's kind of weird that when you click on the text, it kind of like highlights stuff. And actually like if you type, you can actually edit the text view. So this probably isn't the functionality that we want, because we probably just want it for this application anyways, we just want to display the text view. The reason why you can edit this is actually UI text views are editable, so you might have like seen this in some other apps where you kind of like say edit like a bio or something. Usually those are implemented with UI text views. So it is editable. In this case, we don't want it to be though. So let's just go ahead and also add that property. So we just want to go into our text view and say text view dot is editable, and we want to set up to be false, and it'll just make it so that we cannot actually edit the text. Another thing is that you know, this is a relatively short biography, but what happens if it actually gets longer? Like what will it look like? So let's just go ahead and like find, so let's just click on say like the first link of his biography, and let's just kind of copy and paste like a long paragraph. So let's maybe copy and paste this early life, or yeah. So let's take that and also add that to Bill Gates' biography. So let's just do this. So now we have this like very long string for the text view text. Let's just see what this looks like when we run it. Okay, great. So now you see that this is no longer editable. Like if I type, like nothing will happen. And you also see that like, even though our text has gotten longer, the text view just kind of like expanded, like all the text can't fit basically. And the reason is like our constraint made it so that like this is basically going to be constrained all the way to the bottom of our view. So until the text becomes that long, it will not be cut off basically. So yeah, so the last thing that we want to implement is if you look at, you know, again, like the example of the demo in the keynote, we want to be able to click on the button and actually like change the button itself, right? Like this is kind of a very key functionality of many apps, like a follow button, right? So how do we actually like handle user interactions like on views like a button? So the way we do that is inside of inside of like buttons, there is a property called add target. So what we want to do is here in follow button, we want to add a target. And the syntax for that is you add target and then you say self action and you say selector and say follow button tapped and say for touch up inside. So basically what this is saying is you're kind of adding a handler to your button basically. So anytime your button detects a touch up inside action, which just means like a tap, it will kind of trigger this action function. It currently is yelling at us because it cannot find this function, and that's right because we haven't declared this function yet. So let's just declare that function now. So one thing to note about like button function is that like you have to prefix it with an Objective-C tag, kind of. So you want to say Objective-C func follow button tapped. Because functions that are called by like the button is handles differently than like other functions. So this is not like a regular function. So you want to include this add Objective-C like tag in the beginning. So what we want to do is, you know, we want to kind of toggle it, right? So initially, if we have the case where the button is follow, and we want to change it, then clicking the button will change it to be following and a filled in blue. Whereas if it's following, then clicking it will make it, it'll make the text follow, and it'll also make the background white instead. So it seems like there are two different kinds of events to handle. One where if follow button dot current title is equal to follow, then you want to do one thing, and else you want to do another thing. And the current title is how you can access So current title is a property that you can use to access like the title of the button, which we set for. So initially we set it to be follow. So if, so I made a mistake here. So it's not equal, it's equal, equal. For those of you who don't know, equal and equal, equal are treated differently. So equal, the single equal is used as like a variable assigning, we use it to assign variables, whereas equal equals is how you actually compare it to different variables to actually check for equality. So if the current title is follow, then what do we want to do, right? Well, we want to update the title of this follow button. So we're going to say follow button dot set title, and we want to set that to be following instead, and it'll be for just the normal case. And another thing that we might want to do is then change the color, right? So when you click on follow and then it becomes following, now the text is white, right? So you want to say follow button dot set title color, and you want to set that to be like white, and again it'll just be for the normal case, so we'll say normal. And then you also want to change the background, right? So let's say the background color then becomes like blue. And for the other case where your follow button currently is set to following, then what happens is something basically, it's basically the same as what you did before, except the values are changed. So instead of it being following, it will become follow, because if it was following, then you want to change it back to follow. And if it was following before, then it would be white already, so you want to change this back to blue. And then you also want to make the background color back to white. So now let's just run this. Okay, great. So now let's see. If you click on this button, then it'll change it to be following, and then if you click again, it changes it back to follow. Okay, great. So that basically completes all of the functionalities that we wanted to implement. So this is just kind of an example of, how you can get started with creating applications and how you can start to kind of like add views onto your screen and how you can start to kind of like work with and manipulate these views. By no means is this like a comprehensive list of everything that you might want to do. Like, these are not, there might be more properties that you want to set to do like other things, or there might be a number of different views that you want to use. We're going to go more into that in future lectures, and some we'll never even get to. So definitely look around look around Google for like Xcode documentation. Feel free to look at like different kinds of views that exist and see what kinds of properties they have to just like play around and get more familiar with Xcode, Swift, and UIKit. Yeah, and another note that I want to make is I kind of like sped through a lot of these properties, and it's because like I know what they are, but as a beginner iOS developer, you're probably not as familiar with like what these properties are. For recommendations on like figuring out what properties you can use, I would really just recommend going again to the Apple documentation. They have pretty good documentation on like what kinds of properties belong to what class. So if you just play around, you're definitely going to get more acquainted with the properties, and just by doing more of this, you'll kind of get a muscle memory of like how to just like set up a label, how you just set up an image, etc. So yeah, so that kind of concludes the demo. And you can definitely go into here even if you want to play around and update like various things. Like for example, you can try to update like the color of your text, like the color of your text view. You can change the color of your like button. You can add like like border radius, or yeah, like corner radius to your borders. You can kind of like mess around with the sizing of your image and your label. So definitely, like if you want to like explore more of this, feel free to. Yeah. So to conclude the lecture for today, some action items is, again, please just make sure that you are enrolled in the course on Student Center. Again, like the deadline is October 2nd, so please don't forget. Again, look at our Piazza, and also Project 2 will be released right after this lecture. So yeah, you can please take a look and get started on it and ask any questions that you might have in Piazza, and that project will be due next Sunday, October 4th at midnight. Thanks, guys.